Vincent, the Crow Marino, Anthony Russo, and Daniel Two Hands Cortelli were names that sent chills through the streets of New Jersey. They were not movie villains or fictional legends. They were the men who built America's most dangerous mafia from nothing. The Crow moved like a ghost, leaving no trace. Russo thrived on violence, making examples of anyone who dared to resist. Cortelli, quiet but brilliant, handled the money, turning street crimes into an empire worth millions. Together, they created a shadow organization that law enforcement could never truly touch. Their story is not just about power. It's about fear, betrayal, and a legacy that refuses to die. In the early 1980s, the docks of New Jersey were alive with noise, steel, and desperation. Thousands of containers arrived every week, filled with goods from around the world. It was a place where fortune and opportunity collided with crime and corruption. Among the laborers, truck drivers, and hustlers, a small group of men began noticing something others overlooked. They saw that in the endless movement of cargo, there were gaps, moments when shipments could vanish without explanation, when papers could be forged, when the right bribe could erase entire records. These men were not highly educated, nor did they wear suits and ties. They were dock workers, men who knew the value of silence and loyalty. They worked together on night shifts, hauling heavy loads, drinking cheap whiskey, and sharing whispered dreams of escaping poverty. Slowly, those whispers grew into a plan that would become the seed of one of the most feared organizations in America. Their first job was clumsy but effective. A container filled with televisions disappeared on its way to a warehouse. By the time anyone realized, the goods had already been sold off in backroom deals and shady pawn shops. Cars, jewelry, and electronics were vanishing from the docks with no explanation. The authorities dismissed it as paperwork errors or random thefts, never realizing a pattern was emerging. The men began calling themselves the Black Vultures, a name that reflected how they swooped down on opportunities, feeding on the chaos of the city. What set them apart from other small-time criminals was their discipline. They didn't fight over scraps or draw attention to themselves with flashy behavior. Every job was carefully planned, every detail considered. They pooled their earnings, used the money to bribe foremen and security guards, and expanded their reach. Soon, truck drivers were on their payroll, delivering stolen goods to secret warehouses before anyone could raise the alarm. Even police officers began accepting envelopes of cash to look the other way. At the center of it all was a man named Vincent Marino, though most only knew him by his street name, the Crow. He wasn't the loudest or the strongest, but he had a calculating mind. He never left fingerprints, never spoke directly about crimes, and never allowed his men to grow careless. Under his direction, the Vultures rose quickly. By the mid-1990s, they had grown from dock thieves to a powerful crime syndicate. They were no longer just stealing cargo. They controlled gambling dens, extorted small businesses, and forced their way into construction contracts. Every dollar that moved in their territory was a dollar they claimed a piece of. Their rise was almost invisible to outsiders because they left no clear trail. They didn't declare war on rival gangs or spray their name on walls. They moved silently, spreading influence through fear and money. People who dealt with them quickly learned that resistance came with a cost. If a shopkeeper refused to pay for protection, his windows would shatter, his inventory would burn, and eventually, his name would disappear from the neighborhood. Others paid without question. They needed protection. Bars, auto shops, and corner stores received late-night visits from men who offered safety at a price no one dared refuse. Some paid immediately, sliding cash into envelopes with shaking hands. Others resisted, believing the police would protect them, but their faith in the system quickly disappeared. Those who refused were taught lessons so brutal that the community stopped questioning the Vultures altogether. A bakery that ignored their demands went up in flames one night, reduced to blackened ruins. The owner vanished soon after, leaving his family behind with no answers. Word spread fast, and from then on, even whispers of defiance were crushed before they could grow. What made the Vultures unlike the old traditional mafias was their lack of predictable rules. They didn't follow codes of honor or old-world traditions. They thrived on chaos, making it impossible for their enemies to know what would happen next. One week, they would be extorting a string of small shops. The next, they were fixing bids on million-dollar construction projects, ensuring only companies under their control could win contracts. Their reach extended into gambling, drugs, and stolen luxury cars, each operation run with a chilling efficiency. They had no problem destroying anyone in their way, whether it was a rival crew, a police officer, or even one of their own members who showed signs of disloyalty. Fear became their most powerful weapon, spreading through the city faster than any bullet. People began avoiding eye contact with strangers, never knowing who might be connected to the Vultures. Families refused to talk to police. Neighbors pretended not to see crimes happening right outside their doors, and even criminals who once operated freely began staying inside, careful not to attract unwanted attention. The Vultures created an atmosphere where silence became the only way to survive. Behind their growing empire was an invisible web of corruption. Local politicians quietly accepted campaign donations that came with unspoken promises. Police officers looked the other way during raids, collecting cash-filled envelopes as rewards for their silence. Even lawyers and judges, the very people sworn to uphold the law, were compromised. Court cases against suspected members often fell apart mysteriously, with evidence missing or witnesses refusing to appear. It was as if the city itself had been swallowed whole by an invisible hand, leaving ordinary citizens powerless against the machine that controlled them. Despite their power, the Vultures avoided the spotlight. They didn't want fame or headlines. The Crow, their leader, operated in such secrecy that some doubted he even existed. Stories about him became urban legends, whispered late at night in bars and alleyways. Some said he lived in a fortress-like mansion guarded by armed men. Others believed he traveled constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. No photographs, no recordings, no fingerprints tied him to the crimes. To the police, he was a name in a file, nothing more than a ghost pulling strings from the shadows. As their empire expanded, the Vultures mastered the art of psychological control. They didn't just eliminate threats, they made examples out of them. Bodies were found in rivers, construction sites, and abandoned warehouses, each one sending a message to anyone thinking of betrayal. Sometimes victims weren't even killed but left alive, broken and terrified, forced to spread the legend of what the Vultures could do. These stories became fuel for their reputation, giving them more control than any army of men could provide. By the late 1990s, entire communities lived under their shadow. From the ports to the high-rise towers, from gambling dens hidden in basements to lavish nightclubs owned through shell companies, the Vultures had woven themselves of society. And the most terrifying part was how little could be done to stop them. Every investigation stalled. Every brave soul who tried to expose them either disappeared or surrendered to fear. For ordinary people, the law had become a meaningless word. The only law that mattered was the one enforced by the Vultures. Their dominance was not built on flashy violence or public displays of power, but on a quiet, suffocating hold that left the city gasping for air. Unlike other mafias that eventually burned out through arrogance or greed, the Vultures thrived in silence, hidden in the cracks where no light could reach. They had built something far more dangerous than a gang or a syndicate. They had built a shadow empire that ruled not through visible chains, but through invisible fear, and that fear was impossible to escape. In 2002, when federal agents announced Operation Night Cage, there was a sense of anticipation and confidence inside law enforcement offices. After years of frustration, endless dead ends, and cases that collapsed under mysterious circumstances, investigators finally believed they had found a way to dismantle the Black Vultures. For months, undercover operatives had quietly infiltrated the lower levels of the organization, pretending to be drivers, dock workers, and fixers for the crew. Wiretaps, surveillance cameras, and hidden microphones recorded whispered conversations in dimly lit bars and warehouses. For the first time, names, numbers, and routes began to form a picture of how the empire operated. Federal agents believed they were closing in on Vincent, the Crow Marino himself, the man they considered the ghost at the center of it all. When the raids began, they were fast and violent. Helicopters circled the night sky, black vans screeched across city streets, and agents in tactical gear stormed homes, and businesses linked to the syndicate. Dozens of men were dragged from their beds. Warehouses filled with stolen electronics, counterfeit goods, and illegal gambling ledgers were seized, creating the impression of a massive victory. News outlets covered it with bold headlines, declaring that America's most dangerous mafia had finally been brought down. Families who had lived in fear for decades dared to feel relief for the first time. Politicians praised the operation, promising that the reign of terror was over. But the truth was far more complicated. While the public celebrated, the remaining members of the Black Vultures were already adapting. Those arrested were mostly low and mid-level operators, men who were expendable and replaceable. The real power figures had already vanished long before the raids began. It was as if they had known it was coming, and some within law enforcement quietly admitted that leaks were almost certain. Files that should have led directly to senior figures were missing, and key evidence disappeared before it reached the courts. Witnesses who had bravely agreed to testify either retracted their statements or never showed up at all. Trials collapsed, charges were reduced, and many of those arrested were back on the streets within a few short years. The Crow himself remained untouchable. Agents admitted they had not captured a single photograph or recording that proved his existence. It was as though he had evaporated into the night, leaving behind only rumors and shadows. Some began to speculate that he was no longer even alive, but others believed he had simply stepped deeper into the darkness, allowing younger leaders to take over while he guided from afar. What was clear was that the raids had not killed the vultures. They had only trimmed the branches of a tree whose roots ran far too deep. Instead of collapsing, the organization transformed. The newer generation of leaders who stepped in after the raids were far more ruthless and calculated than those before them. They studied the mistakes of the old guard and swore not to repeat them. Communication became tighter, operations became more sophisticated, and money flowed not just through city streets, but across international borders. The Vultures expanded into global smuggling networks, trafficking weapons, drugs, and even human lives with frightening efficiency. Their reach extended into Europe, South America, and Asia, turning what had once been a local crime family into a sprawling, multinational shadow corporation. Law enforcement, once so proud of Operation Night Cage, quietly stopped boasting about it. Inside federal offices, agents admitted privately that the mission had failed to achieve its ultimate goal. Instead of destroying the Mafia, they had made it stronger by forcing it to evolve. The Vultures no longer operated like a street gang. They operated like a business, with hierarchies, coded transactions, and layers of insulation protecting the true decision-makers. Any direct evidence of leadership vanished into a maze of shell companies, offshore accounts, and intermediaries who could be sacrificed if necessary. The illusion of victory had created a dangerous reality. Believing the Mafia had been crushed, communities lowered their guard. Police departments redirected resources elsewhere, and politicians congratulated themselves for a job well done. In the shadows, however, the Vultures were rebuilding, laying down deeper roots while the world celebrated their supposed destruction. Their enemies, both inside and outside the law, soon realized the terrifying truth. The fall of America's most dangerous mafia had never actually happened. What had been presented as an end was only the beginning of a darker, more expansive chapter. Once trembled under their rule. They have become more than an organization. They have become a myth that bends reality, a shadow so large it is impossible to measure. What makes their presence terrifying is not what people see, but what they do not. There are no flashy shootouts, no newsworthy public executions, no loud displays of violence. Instead, there is silence, and in that silence lies power. Business owners still make quiet payments that never appear in tax records. Construction projects still bend to invisible pressures, and entire industries still pay tribute without ever acknowledging to whom. The Vultures have become a hidden current, flowing underneath the surface of society, unseen but always felt. It is widely believed that the children of the old members have inherited the empire, raised from birth to continue the legacy without ever knowing another way of life. These new leaders are not street thugs but educated figures, some with degrees in business and law, men and women who wear suits instead of leather jackets and work from corporate boardrooms rather than smoky backrooms. They manage international networks with the skill of CEOs, turning crime into commerce. Unlike their fathers, They don't leave bodies in alleys unless absolutely necessary. Violence is now used as a surgical tool, precise and rare, designed to send a message without leaving a trail. A single unexplained disappearance can achieve what dozens of gunshots once did. Fear, carefully cultivated and strategically applied, has become their most effective weapon. For law enforcement, the challenge has reached new heights. There are no more easy targets, no weak links bragging in bars, no clumsy mistakes that can be exploited. Every lead runs into a wall of false identities, encrypted messages, and offshore accounts. International borders have become shields, making it nearly impossible for investigators to trace the flow of money or the chain of command. They could bring down the Vultures, now treats them as a ghost organization, acknowledged in theory but untouchable in practice. Files sit in locked drawers, gathering dust, while new crimes are quietly committed under their unseen supervision. Ordinary people have adapted to this reality. In neighborhoods where the Vultures are believed to operate, there is a strange calm. Businesses run smoothly. Crime statistics even appear lower than average. But beneath the surface lies a chilling truth. Everyone is cooperating because everyone is afraid. Those who pay protection money describe it not as extortion but as insurance, a quiet acceptance that survival depends on acknowledging the shadow. Children grow up hearing warnings from their parents, never to ask questions, never to repeat names, never to trust strangers who probe too deeply. In these places, silence has become part of the culture, passed down like an heirloom. The greatest danger of the Black Vultures lies in their invisibility. Other mafias collapsed because they became too greedy, too violent, too visible. The Vultures have learned from those mistakes. They thrive on remaining unseen, on blending into the fabric of everyday life. No one knows how much money they control, how many businesses they own, or how many officials they influence. Estimates are nothing more than speculation, and speculation only feeds the legend. Some say their power is exaggerated, that the Vultures are just a story kept alive by fear. Others insist the opposite, that their reach extends into every corner of society, shaping events far beyond what anyone realizes. The truth is impossible to confirm, and that uncertainty is exactly what keeps their empire alive.